A broken billionaire tests his fiancée to see if she'd stay when he loses everything, only to discover she was fighting a battle he never bothered to see, and the real test was whether he could trust love at all. The penthouse suite overlooking the Manhattan skyline costs more per month than most people earn in a year, but the man standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows isn't admiring the view. He's watching the woman he's supposed to marry in 3 months, studying the way she laughs with her friends 30 floors below at their engagement party, wondering if any of it is real. His reflection stares back at him in the glass. A 38-year-old self-made tech billionaire who built an empire from nothing, who can buy anything in the world except the one thing he desperately needs: certainty. The question eating him alive isn't whether she loves him. It's whether she'd love him if he lost everything. His best friend approaches from behind, footsteps deliberate on the Italian marble. "You're really going through with this?" The words hang in the air like an accusation. He doesn't turn around. Tomorrow morning, the news breaks. Embezzlement scandal, federal investigation, everything frozen. His voice is calm, rehearsed, emptied of emotion. "I've already moved the assets offshore. The lawyers have their scripts. By noon, I'll be broke." His friend exhales slowly, the sound of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. "And if she stays?" The question deserves an answer he doesn't have. "Then I'll know." But there's something darker beneath those words, something that sounds less like hope and more like a trap being set. The memory comes unbidden, his father's voice from 20 years ago, slurred with whiskey and bitterness. "Your mother didn't leave me, son. She left the money. Learn the difference before it's too late." He'd watched his father become a ghost after that, a hollow man who never trusted anyone again, and then his own marriage 5 years ago, when his first startup nearly collapsed. He remembers coming home to an empty apartment, a note on the kitchen counter, her wedding ring beside it. She didn't even wait to see if he'd recover. Just cut her losses and ran. The wound never healed, just calcified into something harder, into this moment, right here, 30 floors above the woman he wants to believe in, but can't. The next morning, his phone explodes with notifications. The story is everywhere: tech mogul accused of embezzling $50 million from investors. Federal investigation underway. Assets seized. His face on every news channel. His name trending for all the wrong reasons. He watches it unfold from a modest apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place he lived in 15 years ago when he was nobody. The furniture is secondhand, the walls are thin, and the whole place smells like someone else's cooking. He's bought 3 suits from a thrift store, disabled his credit cards, and created a new identity. Just Mark Chen now. No billions, no empire, no safety net. The test has begun. She calls within an hour, her voice frantic. "I just saw the news. Where are you? Are you okay?" He tells her he's at a friend's place, that everything's gone, that the lawyers say it could take years to sort out, if ever. There's a long silence on the other end, and in that silence he hears his father's voice again. But then she says, "Give me the address. I'm coming to you." Something in his chest twists, almost like hope, almost like guilt. She arrives with groceries and determination, her eyes red like she's been crying the whole drive over. She walks into his shabby apartment and doesn't flinch at the peeling paint or the rattling radiator. Instead, she puts the bags down, crosses the room, and wraps her arms around him. "We'll get through this," she whispers into his shoulder. "Together." He holds her, breathing in her perfume, and wonders if he's making the biggest mistake of his life. Not the test, but not stopping it. The first week, she's perfect. She brings homemade meals because he can't afford takeout anymore. She holds his hand during his fake doctor's appointments where he's told about a degenerative condition that doesn't exist, watching her face for cracks in the facade. She cries in the bathroom when she thinks he can't hear, and he stands on the other side of the door, cataloging that emotion, filing it away as evidence. Evidence of what? He's not entirely sure anymore, but he notices things. Small things. The way she checks her phone during dinner, the screen lighting up her face with an anxiety that wasn't there before. The way she excuses herself to take calls in the hallway, her voice low and urgent through the thin walls. The way she seems exhausted, like she's carrying something heavy he can't see. He tells himself these are the signs he's been waiting for, the proof that she's already planning her exit, just like the others. He doesn't consider any other explanation because he's not looking for one. Week 2 brings new patterns. She starts arriving later, apologizing about work running long at the nonprofit where she directs programs for a children's hospital. He knows she makes barely enough to live on, has always admired her for choosing purpose over profit, but now he wonders if she's regretting that choice, regretting him. She looks at him sometimes like she wants to say something, then swallows it down. He recognizes that look. It's the same one his ex-wife had right before she left. The look of someone doing math in their head, calculating the cost of staying versus the freedom of leaving. By week 3, the cracks are canyons. She's distracted during conversations, her mind clearly elsewhere. She's lost weight, the stress carving new shadows under her eyes. When he reaches for her hand, sometimes she pulls away, just for a second, before catching herself. She's late more often, sometimes by hours, with explanations that feel rushed and incomplete. His best friend asks how the test is going and he says, exactly as expected. But he doesn't mention the way his chest tightens every time she walks through the door, or the way he's started hoping he's wrong. Week 6 arrives like a deadline. She sits across from him in his cramped apartment, and he knows before she speaks. It's in her posture, the way her shoulders curve inward like she's trying to make herself smaller, to cushion the blow. Her hands are shaking as she reaches into her purse, pulls out the engagement ring, the 3-carat diamond he'd spent hours selecting, the ring that was supposed to represent forever. She places it on the coffee table between them, the small sound it makes against the cheap wood impossibly loud in the silence. I can't do this anymore, she says, and her voice breaks on the last word. I'm so sorry. I thought I could, but I can't. He stares at the ring, then at her. This is the moment he engineered, the conclusion he predicted, the proof he needed. So why does it feel like someone's ripped out his lungs? It's the money, he says, and it's not a question. She flinches like he slapped her. It's not... She starts, then stops, tears streaming down her face. I'm not strong enough for this. I thought I was, but I'm not. She's standing now, moving toward the door, and every instinct screams at him to stop her, to tell her the truth, to end this nightmare. But he doesn't. He lets her walk out because this is what he designed. This is the test. And she failed. The door closes. The apartment is silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. The ring sits on the table, catching the afternoon light, refracting it into small rainbows on the wall. He picks it up, feels its weight, and realizes it's the heaviest thing he's ever held. His phone buzzes, his friend calling, probably wanting to know the results. He doesn't answer. He just sits there in the apartment that isn't really his, living a life that isn't really his, having lost something that was absolutely real, and wonders if passing his test means he's failed at everything that actually matters. But the question gnawing at him now, the one he can't shake as he sits alone surrounded by the evidence of his own paranoia, is this. What if he wasn't testing her love at all? What if he was testing whether the universe would confirm his worst fears? And what if, in designing a test she was meant to fail, he'd actually been engineering his own destruction all along? What would you do if the person you loved walked away when you needed them most? Would you blame them? Or would you wonder what you didn't see? But here's the thing about winning a game you designed yourself. Victory can taste exactly like poison. He wakes up in his penthouse the next morning, back in his real life, surrounded by luxury that suddenly feels like a museum of his own emptiness. The $8,000 mattress, the view that costs more than most houses, the closet full of suits that each cost what he paid for a month in that Brooklyn apartment. None of it matters. His phone sits on the nightstand, and he stares at it like it might explode. No calls, no texts. She's gone. Really gone. And he got exactly what he wanted, didn't he? Proof. Validation. The cold comfort of being right. So why does he feel like he's bleeding out from a wound no one else can see? His best friend arrives with coffee and congratulations that land like insults. You dodged a bullet, man. Can you imagine if you'd married her and then found out? He's talking about her like she's a stock he dumped before it crashed. And something in that clinical assessment makes his stomach turn. Because the test was supposed to bring clarity, wasn't it? The test was supposed to show him the truth. But all he can think about is the way she cried when she returned the ring, the tremor in her hands, the look in her eyes that seemed less like greed and more like grief. He tells his friend he needs to be alone, and when the door closes, he realizes alone is all he has left. The first week back in his real life, he tries to pretend everything is normal. Board meetings and conference calls and acquisition negotiations, the machinery of wealth grinding forward like nothing happened. But he can't focus. He keeps seeing her face, hearing her voice breaking on those words. I'm not strong enough for this. What did that even mean? Not strong enough to be poor? Or not strong enough for something else entirely? The question becomes an itch he can't scratch, a splinter working its way deeper. He starts looking for her in ways that feel increasingly pathetic. Her social media accounts, deleted. Every photo, every post, gone like she's erasing herself from the world. He drives past her apartment building in Brooklyn, the one where she lived in a tiny studio she could barely afford, always joking that she had a great view of the brick wall next door. There's a "For Rent" sign in the window. She moved. Why? He sits in his car across the street for an hour like some kind of stalker, trying to understand why a woman who just dumped her broke fiancé would also abandon her home. Have you ever noticed how the questions we're afraid to ask are always the ones we most need answered? He calls her office at the nonprofit, disguising his number, his voice. The receptionist is cheerful until he asks for her, and then there's a pause, a shift in temperature. She's on extended leave. I can take a message? He hangs up without answering because extended leave means something happened, something beyond just ending an engagement. People don't blow up their entire lives over a breakup unless the breakup was just one piece of something larger, unless there was more to the story than he ever bothered to look for. 3 weeks of this circular obsession, this haunting by someone who's alive but unreachable, and then he decides to do something that feels both generous and selfish. He'll make a donation to her nonprofit, a big one, big enough that it might ease the guilt that's eating through him like acid. Big enough that maybe someone there will talk to him, tell him how she is, confirm that she's okay so he can finally move on. He tells himself this is about closure. He doesn't examine too closely why closure requires seeing her workplace. She breathed, walking the halls where she spent 60-hour weeks trying to save sick children. The nonprofit occupies 3 floors of an old building in Queens, the kind of place where the elevator groans and the fluorescent lights flicker and everything smells like industrial cleaner and hope running on fumes. There are crayon drawings on the walls, thank you cards from families, photos of children who got better and children who didn't. He stands in the lobby feeling absurdly out of place in his $3,000 suit, and that's when he sees her, not his ex-fiancée, but her colleague, a woman he met once at a fundraiser. She recognizes him instantly, and her expression shifts from professional courtesy to something that looks dangerously close to contempt. You have some nerve showing up here, she says, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. She's standing between him and the elevator like a human barrier, arms crossed, eyes hard. He opens his mouth to explain about the donation, but she cuts him off. After what you put her through? The words hit him like a physical blow because they make no sense. He put her through something? She's the one who left. She's the one who failed the test. But there's something in this woman's face, in the way she's looking at him like he's something she'd scrape off her shoe, that makes his certainty wobble. I don't understand, he says, and he hates how his voice sounds. Small, confused, like a child who's lost the plot. The colleague, Sarah, he remembers now, her name is Sarah, laughs, but there's no humor in it. Of course you don't. She glances around the lobby, at the receptionist pretending not to listen, at the families waiting in the uncomfortable chairs, and then she grabs his arm and pulls him into a conference room, closing the door with enough force to rattle the frame. And this is where everything he thought he knew began to disintegrate. Sarah doesn't sit. She paces like she's trying to burn off rage, and when she finally speaks, each word is carefully chosen, loaded with judgment. Elena liquidated her entire savings to pay for her brother's cancer treatments. Stage 3 lymphoma. Diagnosed 9 months ago, right before you proposed. The room tilts. He grabs the back of a chair to steady himself because cancer, brother, 9 months ago. None of these words were in the story he told himself. Sarah continues, relentless now. She's been waiting to say this for weeks. She took out loans. She sold everything she owned, including her mother's jewelry, the only thing she had left after her mom died. She was working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, doing everything humanly possible to keep her brother alive. The words are coming too fast, too sharp, each one a blade. And then you got sick. Or she thought you did. You, with your fake illness and your fake poverty and your real self-pity. Sarah's voice cracks now, emotion breaking through the anger. She was going to lose everything. The bank was threatening foreclosure on the loans. The hospital was talking about stopping treatment. She couldn't save you both. The pause that follows is infinite, a chasm opening beneath his feet. So she chose her baby brother who was dying. And you have the audacity to come here, to her workplace, after abandoning her when she needed you most. But that's wrong. That's backwards. He's trying to speak, to correct this fundamental misunderstanding, but his throat won't work because the misunderstanding isn't Sarah's. It's his. It was always his. She didn't abandon him because she didn't love him. She left because she loved someone else more, someone whose life was actually on the line, someone who wasn't pretending to be sick while secretly sitting on $1 billion fortune. The test he designed to prove her greed actually proved the opposite. Proved she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness for family. Proved she was exactly who he'd hoped she was. And he destroyed her for it. Where is she? The question comes out strangled. Sarah's expression shifts from anger to something worse. Pity. She's gone. Took Luca to some town on the coast where treatment is cheaper, where she could afford a place to live while he... She stops, swallows hard. The prognosis isn't good. They had to stop the experimental treatments because she couldn't pay for them anymore. He's got maybe 6 months, and she's spending them working at a diner, sleeping on someone's couch, watching her brother die by inches. Sarah moves to the door, hand on the knob. Done with him. So congratulations. I hope the test was worth it. He stands alone in the conference room for 20 minutes after she leaves, trying to breathe through the crushing weight of understanding. Every moment from the past 6 weeks replays in his mind with the caption corrected, the narrative rewritten. Her distraction wasn't disinterest, it was terror. Those phone calls she stepped away for weren't secret plans to leave. They were desperate negotiations with hospital billing departments. The exhaustion in her eyes wasn't falling out of love. It was the look of someone being torn in half by an impossible choice. And that final conversation, when she returned the ring with shaking hands and said she wasn't strong enough, she wasn't confessing to being a gold digger. She was confessing to being human, to not being able to watch 2 people she loved suffer when she could only save one. What would you have done? If you had to choose between saving someone you loved romantically or someone you loved as family, knowing you couldn't save both, where would your loyalty fall? He walks out of that building a different person than the one who walked in, and the first thing he does is call his assistant. Find Luca Rossi, cancer patient, mid-20s, recently relocated. I need everything. What hospital, what treatment, what he needs. His assistant doesn't ask questions. 6 hours later, he has a file on his desk that reads like a tragedy in medical terminology. Stage 3 lymphoma, briefly in remission, relapsed after treatment, was discontinued. Currently receiving palliative care at a clinic in a coastal town 3 hours north. Prognosis: terminal without intervention. Cost of intervention: $300,000 for the experimental treatment that might save his life. $300,000. He spends more than that on art he doesn't look at. He's donated more than that to museums to get his name on a wall. He carries watches that cost more than that. And this woman he claimed to love, this woman he tested and judged and found wanting, nearly destroyed herself trying to scrape together a fraction of that amount while he played make-believe poverty in Brooklyn. The shame is so profound it's almost paralyzing. Almost. He gets in his car and drives north. He doesn't call ahead, doesn't make a plan. He just drives toward the coordinates his assistant provided, and somewhere around hour 2, with the city disappearing behind him and the ocean emerging ahead, he starts to understand the full scope of what he's done. Not just to her, but to himself, because the test was never really about her, was it? It was about him, about his fear, about his father's bitterness, and his ex-wife's abandonment and every scar he'd accumulated until he couldn't tell the difference between protection and self-destruction. His CFO had asked him weeks ago, what if she stays? But the real question, the one he was too afraid to ask, was, what if I'm wrong? What if the world isn't full of people waiting to betray him? What if trust isn't weakness? What if the only thing his test actually measured was his own capacity for cruelty? The town is small, the kind of place where tourists come in summer and locals barely survive in winter. He finds her by accident, or maybe fate, or maybe just because in a town this small, there are only so many diners. She's wearing a uniform that's slightly too big, hair pulled back in a ponytail, taking orders from a family with 3 loud children. She moves with efficiency born from exhaustion and even from across the street. Watching through the window of his parked car, he can see how much weight she's lost, how the light in her has dimmed to something barely flickering. He sits there for an hour, watching her work, and every smile she forces for customers feels like an indictment. Then he sees someone else, a young man, thin to the point of frail, waiting outside the diner when her shift ends. They embrace, and the tenderness in it, the way she holds him like he might break, the way he leans on her like she's the only thing keeping him upright. This must be Luca. Her brother. The person she chose. The person currently dying because the man who claimed to love her decided to play God with her loyalty. He watches them walk toward a beat-up car, watches her help her brother into the passenger seat with the careful movements of someone managing pain, watches her sit behind the wheel with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel for just a moment before she starts the engine, and in that moment, he makes a decision. Not to confront her, not yet. He's not ready, and more importantly, she deserves better than his guilt showing up uninvited. But he can do something. He can fix the thing he helped break. The next morning, he meets with the administrator of the clinic where Luca is receiving care. Anonymous donor, he insists. Full payment for the experimental treatment, best doctors flown in, whatever it takes. The administrator's eyes go wide at the number on the check, stammers something about verifying funds, and he cuts her off. It's verified. Start the treatment today. He leaves before she can ask questions, before gratitude can make him feel less like the villain he absolutely is. But here's what he doesn't know yet. What he won't discover until later, until it's almost too late. She already knows. Or at least, she suspects. Because 2 weeks into his test, she'd seen something. An article online about a tech mogul's embezzlement scandal. And the photo didn't quite match the man living in that Brooklyn apartment. The hairline was different. The age seemed off by a few years. And the name, Marcus Chen versus Mark Chen, was close but not quite right. She'd confronted his CFO at a coffee shop near her office, caught him off guard, and in his stammering denial, he'd accidentally confirmed everything. The test, the fake illness, the manipulation. And she'd made a choice. She could confront him, could end the charade, could walk away in righteous anger. Or she could stay and hope that somewhere in this twisted test, he'd realize what he was doing, that he'd stop, that he'd trust her enough to come clean, that the man she fell in love with was still in there, beneath the trauma and the fear. So she stayed. She played along with his poverty, with his illness, with the slow-motion train wreck of their relationship. She stayed because she loved him, even knowing he didn't trust her enough to love her back. But then, Luca's condition worsened. The bank sent final notices. The hospital delivered ultimatums, and she realized she couldn't do both, couldn't keep playing a role in his test while her brother's life hung in the balance. So she gave him the ending he seemed so desperate to write. She failed his test on purpose, let him think the worst of her, because at least that way he'd be free to move on, and she'd be free to focus on keeping Luca alive. She knew. The entire time she knew, and she loved him anyway, right up until she couldn't afford to anymore. He's sitting in a motel room 3 blocks from the diner, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, when his phone rings. It's the clinic administrator. "Mr. Chen, I thought you'd want to know. We've started the treatment. Luke is responding well. His sister is here and well, she's confused about where the money came from, but she's grateful. Should I tell her who—" He cuts her off. "No, keep it anonymous." He ends the call and sits in the dark, listening to the sound of waves through the thin walls, wondering if doing the right thing can ever cancel out doing the wrong thing first. And the question that haunts him now, as he lies in a motel bed in a town where no one knows his name or his net worth, is this: can you earn forgiveness for a sin the other person doesn't even know you committed? Can you fix what you broke if she never learns you were the one who broke it? Or is redemption something that only counts when it costs you everything? Because he's about to find out that some truths can't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig the grave. And some women are far more perceptive than the men who underestimate them. So here's the question that changes everything. What do you do when the person you wronged finds out the truth? Not from your confession, but from your cowardice. 2 months pass like a held breath. 2 months of anonymous donations funding Luca's treatment, of experimental therapies that actually work, of a young man's body slowly remembering how to fight. 2 months of him staying in that coastal town, renting a house on the edge of the water, watching from a distance as her life starts to look less like survival and more like something with a future in it. He tells himself he's waiting for the right moment to reveal himself, but the truth is simpler and more pathetic. He's terrified. Terrified that she'll look at him the way Sarah did, with that mixture of contempt and pity that makes you feel smaller than you've ever been. But distance has a way of collapsing when you're not looking. He's sitting in that same diner where she works, baseball cap pulled low, newspaper held high like some amateur spy, when he hears her voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "I know you're there." His blood turns to ice. He lowers the paper slowly, and she's standing 3 feet away, coffee pot in hand, and the expression on her face isn't what he expected. It's not anger. It's not joy. It's exhaustion mixed with something that might be resignation. She's been waiting for this shoe to drop and is almost relieved it finally has. She sets the coffee pot down on his table with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. "Outside. Now, or I'm calling the cops for stalking." She doesn't wait for his response, just walks out the back door of the diner into the parking lot where the ocean wind whips her hair across her face. He follows because what else can he do? And when they're standing beside her beat-up car, far enough from the building that no one can hear, she turns on him with an intensity that makes him step back. 2 months, she says, and her voice is shaking but not with weakness, with rage that's been simmering under careful control. 2 months of you lurking around this town like some kind of ghost. You think I didn't notice? You think in a place this small, someone doesn't mention the guy in the expensive car who asks questions about me? About Luca? She's crying now, angry tears that she wipes away with the back of her hand. "How dare you come here after what you did?" He opens his mouth to apologize, to explain, but she cuts him off with a bitter laugh. "And here's the worst part. I knew. I figured out your little test after 2 weeks. The words hit him like a physical blow. She knew. Sarah had told him she knew, but hearing it from her, seeing the pain in her eyes as she says it, makes it real in a way that actually hurts. "I saw the article. The photo didn't match. I confronted David and he couldn't lie worth a damn." She's pacing now, energy spilling out of her in waves. "So I stayed. Like an idiot, I stayed because I actually thought that somewhere in this sick test, you'd realize what you were doing. That you'd stop. That you'd trust me." The confession breaks something in him. "I'm sorry," sounds pathetically inadequate, but it's all he has. She shakes her head, more tears falling. "You were so afraid of being hurt that you destroyed the only real thing either of us had. And when I had to choose between playing along with your paranoia or saving my brother's life, you judged me for choosing family." Her voice cracks on the word family. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? Do you have any concept of what it feels like to be tested by someone who claims to love you? He's crying now too, not bothering to hide it. I know, and I'm sorry doesn't cover it. I was broken, and I broke you in the process. My father, my ex-wife. I let their damage become mine until I couldn't tell the difference between protection and destruction. He takes a breath that feels like swallowing glass. You were never the one being tested. I was, and I failed. I failed so completely that it took losing you to realize the problem was never your sincerity. It was my inability to believe in it. She's quiet for a long moment, just the sound of waves and distant traffic and their ragged breathing. Then she reaches into her jacket pocket and pulls out a folded piece of paper. Luca wanted me to give you this. Her voice is softer now, the rage burning down to something more manageable. He's in remission. The experimental treatment worked, and he knows about the anonymous donor who paid for everything. She hands him the letter, and their fingers brush for just a second, that old electricity still there beneath all the damage. He unfolds it with shaking hands. The handwriting is messy, the hand of someone still regaining strength, but the words are clear. She talks about you every day. She's miserable without you. She loves you, the real you and the fake you. But if you hurt her again, I'll kick your ass. I'm in remission, so I can take you now. Don't waste this second chance. Most people don't get one. Luca. He reads it twice, 3 times, each word a small permission he doesn't deserve. When he looks up, she's watching him with an expression he can't quite read. I don't forgive you, she says quietly, and the words should hurt, but they don't because they're honest, and honest is what they should have been from the start. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. What you did was cruel, and it broke something between us that won't heal overnight. She pauses, and in that pause, he hears the echo of possibility. But Luca's right about one thing. You saved his life. You paid for treatment you had no obligation to pay for. You could have just disappeared, lived with your guilt privately, but you stayed. You fixed what you could fix. It doesn't make up for what I did, he says, and he means it. She nods. No, it doesn't, but it's a start. The wind picks up, carrying the salt smell of the ocean between them. If you want another chance, and I mean because I'm not promising anything, you have to earn it. No more tests, no more games, no more lies. Just truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. He nods, throat too tight to speak. I've been in therapy, he finally manages. Since the day Sarah told me about Luca, working through the trust issues, the trauma, all of it. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't do it again. She considers this, and something in her posture softens just slightly. Good. Keep going. She glances back at the diner where someone's probably wondering where she is. I have to get back to work, but there's a coffee shop 2 blocks down. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. If you want to actually try, not test, not manipulate, just try, show up. We'll talk, really talk, and we'll see if there's anything left to save. She starts to walk away, then stops, turns back. And Marcus, this isn't one of your business deals. You don't get to control the outcome. You don't get guarantees. You get honesty and effort and the possibility that maybe eventually we can rebuild something real. That's the only offer on the table. He watches her disappear back into the diner, watches her pick up that coffee pot and return to taking orders. The last 10 minutes didn't just rearrange his entire world. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he feels something that isn't guilt or shame or desperate need for control. He feels hope. Small, fragile, unearned hope. The next morning, he's at that coffee shop at 6:45, hands wrapped around a cup he's too nervous to drink, watching the door like his life depends on what walks through it. And when she arrives at 7 exactly, hair still damp from a shower, wearing jeans and a sweater that's seen better days, no makeup, no armor, just her, he stands up and pulls out her chair and says the only thing that matters, "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve." She sits down, orders coffee from the waitress who knows her by name, and then looks at him with those eyes that saw through his test from the beginning. "Tell me about your father," she says. "Tell me where this started. If we're going to do this, I need to understand." And he does. He tells her everything. Not to justify, but to explain. not to earn forgiveness, but to offer transparency. And somewhere in that conversation, between the refills and the sunrise painting the ocean gold, something shifts. Not fixed, not healed, but possible. So here's what I want you to think about. Have you ever let fear destroy something beautiful? Have you ever been so convinced you'd be betrayed that you engineered the very betrayal you feared? And if you got a second chance, a real, messy, uncertain second chance, would you be brave enough to take it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about a time trust changed your life, for better or worse. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, hit that like button and subscribe, because next week we're diving into another story about power, love, and the price we pay for both. Until then, remember, the only test that matters in love is whether you're brave enough to trust. Everything else is just fear wearing a crown.